You are listening to KSG Podcast. This is a short, crisp, concise, edited editorial that is exam oriented for civil services aspirants. In this podcast, we are going to talk about India's announcement on climate targets. Source is Amitabh Sinha's article for the Indian Express. Speaking at the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow earlier in the week of November 2021, Prime Minister Narendra Modi shortened the timeline on the country's existing climate targets and announced a few new targets as well. Modi's announcements underline India's commitment to the fight against climate change, and importantly, none of the targets are likely to be too difficult to achieve. Of the 5-point targets announced by Modi on the 2nd of November 2021, achieving net zero emission status by 2070 is the one with least clarity as of now. This is because this promise seems to have been made primarily to satisfy the international demand. At the same time, 2070 is a long way away, and there is plenty of time to plan a roadmap to achieve that target. The other 4 targets have to be achieved in a much more immediate time frame by 2030. 2 of these, about reducing emissions intensity and increasing the renewable mix in electricity generation, are already part of India's official climate action plan called the Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs, that has been submitted as part of the requirement under the Paris Agreement. In that NDC, submitted in 2015, India had promised to reduce its emissions intensity, or emissions per unit of GDP, by 33% to 35% from 2005 levels by the year 2020. Also, India had said it would ensure that at least 40% of its installed capacity of electricity generation in the year 2030 would come through non-fossil fuel-based energy sources. Both these targets have been enhanced by Modi. The emissions intensity reduction target has been raised to 45%, and the share of renewables in installed electricity capacity has been increased to 50%. There was some confusion about the renewables target because of the words used by Modi during his speech. The Prime Minister said India intended to fulfill 50% of its energy requirement through renewable energy by 2030. This came as a surprise since electricity is only one part of the larger energy basket, and all previous commitments were formulated for electricity generation, not energy. A senior official of the Environment Ministry has since confirmed to the Indian Express that enhanced target indeed related to installed electricity capacity and not energy requirement. This will be correctly reflected in the revised NDC that India will submit to the UN Climate Secretariat incorporating the new targets. India was already on course to achieve both these existing targets well before the 2030 deadline. India's emissions intensity was 24% below 2005 levels in 2016 itself, the latest year for which official data are available. A 33 to 35% reduction is expected to be achieved within the next 2 years. Although initial reductions are much easier to achieve than later ones, achieving a 40% reduction is not expected to pose too much of a challenge. By November 2020, the share of renewables include large hydropower in total installed capacity of electricity generation had already reached over 36% according to the government data. The share of non-fossil fuel energy sources was over 38%. Most of the new capacity additions are happening in the renewable space, and therefore taking this share to 50% will likely not be too difficult. Incidentally, the third promise made in India's NDC about increase in forest cover did not find a mention in Modi's speech in Glasgow, and that is the only target that India is struggling to achieve. In the NDC, India has promised to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 billion to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through forest and tree cover by the year 2030. Although India's forest cover has been growing, according to official data, the pace of growth as of now is far from being commensurate with what is required to achieve the target. The 2 other announcements made by Modi about raising installed capacity of renewable energy and an absolute reduction of 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide by 2030 are not part of India's existing commitments but are nonetheless linked. India had initially set out to install 20 gigawatts of solar power capacity by the year 2020. That was later raised to 100 gigawatts by 2022. Targets for wind and biogas were subsequently added, making it a renewable energy park capacity target of 175 gigawatts for the year 2022. 2 years ago, Modi enhanced this to 450 gigawatts for the year 2030. None of this was ever part of the NDC, though. These were publicly announced targets that India had set for itself. In Glasgow, Modi said India would have 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel-based energy capacity by the year 2030. Non-fossil fuels include not just renewables like solar or wind, but also nuclear and hydro, which together make up over 50 gigawatts right now. That means there is little change in the 450 gigawatts target for renewable energy. Achieving that would automatically achieve the target of the 500 gigawatt for non-fossil fuel energy sources. Also, nuclear energy itself is in the process of a significant ramping up. Installed nuclear power capacity is set to increase to 22 gigawatts by the year 2031 from the current 7 gigawatts. That's it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To join KSG India courses and to crack the IELTS exam, visit ksgindia.com. You can also get a PDF of this podcast on ksgindia.com. Thanks for listening.